Good morning. I'm Stas Margaronis, president of the Propeller Club of Northern California. And this morning, we are welcoming a guest from Australia, Peter Enav. And the discussion topic is how Taiwan challenges could impact global shipping and the United States. A briefing by Peter Enav, Taiwan Strait Risk Report, and it is Tuesday, January 21st. Before we get started, one of the things that we do in our meetings is we do introductions, and I go around and ask everybody if they could just briefly introduce themselves and give us their name and their affiliation. And I will start with my longtime support and IT professional, Todd Crawshaw. Todd, good morning and welcome.
Morning. So Crawford Design is a digital media, graphic design, and web hosting firm.
Very good. Peter, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm an American. I was educated in Northern California. I've spent about 17 years in East Asia, Southeast Asia. Have had an abiding interest in China, U.S.-China relations, and in Taiwan, which I first visited more than 50 years ago. I try to maintain as much objectivity as I can in making these sorts of presentations and in providing information via our Taiwan Strait Risk Report, which I'll talk about in a bit. But I do feel very connected to the area and very connected to what happens to it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mike Chapman, good morning.
Morning, Stas. Mike Chapman, a member of the Northern Propeller Club, Women's Propeller Club, Port of the Golden Gate, a retired fireman, 18 years now after 32 years service. Support the Red Oak Victory, the Jeremiah O'Brien, and California Maritime.
Thank you very much. And we are honored to have retired Admiral Joel Whitehead, the Executive Vice President of the International Propeller Club. Joel, good morning.
Good morning, Stas. Good morning, everybody. I'm Joel Whitehead, retired Coast Guard and Executive Vice President of the International Club, which is based out of Fairfax, Virginia. For those of you who don't know about the International Propeller Club, we're getting ready to celebrate our 100th anniversary in a few years. And we have about 70 chapters around the world, about 35 in the United States and 25 or 30 or so in foreign countries. And we'd love to join. If you're interested, let me know. Thanks.
We are very honored to have you, Joel. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Amy Skoll, you want to introduce yourself, Amy?
Yes, my apologies. I was coming from another meeting, but I am Amy Skoll. I'm one of the tenure track faculty in the Department of International Strategy and Security on this campus, along with my colleagues, Chris Chiego and Ryan Wade and Jen Metz. And so I don't know how much information I was supposed to share other than
that. That would be good. That's
okay.
fine.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay. Bye-bye. Benita Margaronis. Benita, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Benita Margaronis, Stas Margaronis' daughter.
And you help out your daughter with Propeller Club work, right?
Yes, I help you out.
Okay. Thank you, Benita. Bill Lavely. Bill, can you hear me? Okay. I'm going to go on to Captain Ann McIntyre. Captain, good morning. Well, going once, going twice. Ann, can you hear me? Okay. Christopher Chiego. Oh, there's Captain McIntyre. Anne?
Good morning. Something's going on with my computer here. Ann McIntyre, I'm the business director with the pilots.
San Francisco Bar Pilots. Okay, Christopher Chiego. Christopher, good morning.
Hi, all, and good morning. I'm coming here right from the Cal Maritime campus. We got a room of about, let's say, 30 students in here, 25, 30 students here on this. And I'm an assistant professor in Professor Skoll's department, International Strategy and Security. And I'm thrilled to be here today and talk about Taiwan.
Thank you very much. Darren Shems. Good morning, Darren.
Good morning. It's been a while. So I'm one of the senior route analysts with Storm Geo. It's been about 15 years now. I also do some internal audit leadership in the company and train on all the ISO standards and help manage those internal teams and training staff.
Very good. Thank you very much. Kevin Claypool.
Stas, how are you, everybody? Kevin Claypool. I'm a commercial banker with Five Star Bank. Know Stas through Ann McIntyre and the Bar Pilots, and looking to do more business in the maritime industry. So I'm here to listen and learn, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad you could make it, Kevin, and we hope to have you more involved with the Propeller Club.
We'll love that. Thank you.
Thank you. We have retired Admiral Michael Dumont, president of the California Maritime Academy. Admiral, good morning.
Thanks, Stas. Good morning, everybody. Mike Dumont here. I'm the interim president of Cal Maritime.
Thank you. I have somebody whose moniker is Enmore.
Oh, that's me. I'm sorry. My name is Nanami Morikawa. I work at the Storm Geo with Darren and Tony.
Oh.
Yes, I work at the Voyage Performance Analysis Department.
Very good. Welcome. Thank you very much. Okay. Captain Bannister, good morning.
Good morning, Stas and everybody. Captain Bannister here at the California State Maritime Academy. I'm the Director of Marine Programs and certainly interested in security.
And we discussed my interviewing you and your colleagues about our new training ship that's coming soon. So I'm hoping that you're going to get back to me about that.
We will get back to you soon, yes.
Thank you very much, Captain.
Thank you.
Stan Maupin. Stan, how are you?
Good morning. Good to see everybody. I'm a commissioner with the Port of Redwood City, and I, like Mike Chapman, I retired after 32 years in the fire department as the fire chief of Redwood City. So couldn't keep my hand out of it and had to get back involved. So I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you, Stan. Thank you very much for being with us. Sung Lee. Sung, good morning.
Good morning. Sung-Wook Lee. I'm a licensed custom broker. Also the president of the Northern California Custom Brokers and Freight Forwarders Association. Also the president of Northern California District Export Council.
Very good. Thank you for being with us, Sung. Peter Dreyfus, good morning.
Good morning, Stas. I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer of Watermaster North America. We are manufacturing a shallow water dredging machine up to 20 feet deep. And thank you.
You're welcome. And good to see you, Brother Dreyfus.
Yes, sir.
Always a pleasure.
Yes.
Matthew LaFiandra. Matthew, good morning.
Good morning, everybody. Matt LaFiandra, Ocean Solutions LLC. We're a ship broker for dry bulk and oil and oil products. And we are a derivatives broker for freight futures, covering both the wet and dry shipping sectors globally. Also a proud employer of a couple Cal Maritime graduates a couple years ago.
To say that.
And given the number of Cal Maritime people on the line, very happy to report that one of our Cal Maritime grads fixed her first ship 2 days ago, booking a cargo from East Coast, South America to Asia. So we're very proud of her. She's taken about 2 years to get to this point, but is firmly launched on her career in international shipbroking.
That is really good news, Matthew. I'm very, very pleased to hear that our Cal Maritime grads are starting to make an inroads into the business. You have been a really great person in promoting them and bringing them on board, and I want to thank you very much for all of your good efforts. I do want to remind you that we're supposed to have a luncheon date, and you live about 7 minutes down the road from me. So I need to hear from you.
Yes, you're right, Stas. You're right. I've been deficient. I will follow up.
Okay. Thank you very much, Matthew. Tony Petronio, did I introduce you?
Not yet. Good morning, Stas. Good morning, everybody. Tony Petronio, Operations Director, Routing Advisory Services with Storm Geo. Good to see everybody.
And Tony and Darren and Storm Geo, I want to thank you for all of your support of the Propeller Club, including with our Storms, Flooding, and Sea Level Defense Conference. You guys have been really great. Your panel presentation on weather forecasting was really well received and very timely, and likely to be in demand even more as weather becomes even more problematic in the future. Thank you guys very much.
Our pleasure, Stas.
You're welcome. Have I got everybody? Did I introduce anybody? If I haven't got your name, would you chime up?
I think you didn't introduce Kevin Policarpo.
Kevin, how can I forget you? Kevin Policarpo, my researcher. Kevin, good morning.
Good morning, Stas, and good morning to everyone else. I'm Stas's research assistant, and I'm also the note taker for the session.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. And I see Bill Waverly showed up. Bill, good
Hi,
morning.
I'm here at last. Thank you very much. I'm a professor of international studies at University of Washington, and I'm interested in Taiwan.
Bill, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Okay. So before we get started, I have a couple of opening remarks, and then I'm going to introduce Peter. I want to start by saying I visited Taiwan last June and came away with the belief that the United States needs to continue to support Taiwan in the face of growing challenges from China. The loss of Taiwan not only would deprive 24 million Taiwanese of their human rights, but China's control over Taiwan could undermine the national security of our allies in the Pacific, including not only Taiwan, but Japan, Korea, the Philippines, Australia, New Zealand, and other Asian nations. Our international trade would also be at stake for imports such as semiconductors from Taiwan, and our exports might be challenged. Those exports include beef, wheat, soybeans, products we ship from California, almonds, pistachios, wine, etc. And we ship them from West Coast ports too, including our home port of Oakland. Semiconductors from Taiwan help us operate leading-edge electronics, including AI systems that we use in manufacturing, design, healthcare, factories, and warehouses. Recently, thanks to the bipartisan supported CHIPS Act, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, a world semiconductor leader, has received federal support to locate new manufacturing in the United States along with other producers. The loss of Taiwan and Taiwan Semiconductor would advance China and not the United States. It's something that we should think about in terms when we think that this is not an important issue. My daughter, Benita, asked me why we should be concerned with a country so far away when we have so many challenges at home. But we are an interconnected world, and our trade, imports, and exports affect us every day. The loss of Taiwan would also advance China's naval reach across the Pacific and directly threaten Guam, and potentially Hawaii, Alaska, and by extension, the continental United States. Americans have never run from a fight, and we should not now. To help us understand the issues that we're facing, we've invited Peter Enav to come and speak to us today. As Peter alluded to in his introduction, he is the founder and editor of Taiwan's Strait Risk Report. He has spent 17 years living and working in Asia, including 9 as the head of the Taipei Bureau of the Associated Press, where he closely monitored Taiwan defense issues and the evolution of the US-China-Taiwan strategic triangle. Peter Enav, good morning and welcome to the Propeller Club of Northern California.
Good morning, Stas, and good morning to all the attendees today. I'm honored to be with you. Let me just start out, if we could get the first slide up, the map slide. Let me just start out by talking a little bit about why we founded the Taiwan Strait Risk Report, which was about 2.5 years ago. I did this with a fellow called Mike Shanoy, who some of you may know from his years as the chief Asia correspondent for CNN. We thought, and this was at about the time that then Speaker Pelosi visited Taiwan, we thought that the United States and China were on a collision course over the future of Taiwan, a collision course that would have immense geopolitical and economic implications. When we started the publication, we did not foresee the possibility that Donald Trump would be reelected president of the United States. We're now, about 26 hours into Trump's presidency. So it may be premature to make some judgments about where we think he's going, but I'm going to do so anyway because I think the trend lines are pretty clear. I would sum up the situation by saying that if what we think will happen does in fact happen, we are looking at the most revolutionary situation in security terms in East Asia since the rise of Japanese power in the 1930s and the outbreak of World War II. I know that that's a pretty frightening statement, but I hope in the next 15 minutes or so, as I move forward with my presentation, that you will understand where I am coming from and where we at Taiwan Strait Risk Report are coming from. I think to begin to understand, if we could have the next slide, please. If we could begin to understand why we think what's going on is going to result in the kind of situation that I've just described. Let's start by looking at the 3 major players. The first to this evolving Taiwan Strait drama. The first, of course, is China. China claims that Taiwan belongs to it. It has done so essentially since 1942, 7 years before the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949. What is different now is that for the first time in the history of the People's Republic of China, it has the ability to do something about it. That's on the back of tremendous investments in the Chinese military since the early to mid 1990s. It's on the back of a single-minded interest in bringing Taiwan into the fold on the part of Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader. He's very different from Mao Zedong, who famously told Kissinger and Nixon in '72 that the Taiwan problem could be deferred for 100 years or so. Xi Jinping doesn't feel that way. He wants Taiwan. He's instructed the People's Liberation Army to be ready to move against it by 2027, so that it's very clear that Taiwan, and to some extent, of course, the United States, is facing a grave challenge. Now, Taiwan itself, it's a democracy of 24 million people, about 90% of whom, according to public opinion polls that have been conducted over the last 15 years with very little change, about 90% of whom oppose a Chinese political takeover. Since June of 1950, when the United States entered the Korean War, it's essentially been an American protectorate. From the U.S. perspective, it has three important things going for it, at least. One is its democratic political system. Another is its location at the center of the first island chain, which is a chain of islands basically extending from Japan through Taiwan and through Indonesia, that constrains China's ability to project power eastwards through Guam to Hawaii, and as Stas mentioned in his opening remarks, all the way to the U.S. West Coast potentially. In facing China, however, Taiwan in and of itself faces some major problems. One of those problems, probably the main one, I would say, is its lack of political resiliency, which stems from a self-delusion about the nature of the Chinese threat. Many Taiwanese are essentially in denial about how acute that threat is. It suffers from toxic domestic politics. It suffers from poor civil-military relations, and it's being further undermined by a very aggressive Chinese fifth column, which I would argue is being led by a former Taiwanese president who has a lot of influence. The third player, of course, is the United States. Now, the U.S. has played a vital role as Taiwan's protector since the outbreak of the Korean War, or since the United States entered the Korean War in June of 1950. Its commitment to Taiwan has extended from the era of Chiang Kai-shek, who was a dictator, and all the way through the democratization period, which begins in the very late 1970s and culminates with the first free and fair presidential elections in Taiwan in 1996, and up until the present day. The U.S. commitment was particularly conspicuous under President Biden's leadership. Biden said on 4 separate occasions that were the Chinese to attack Taiwan, the U.S. would respond by sending American military assets to help defend Taiwan. That goes beyond the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, which commits the United States to making military hardware available to the Taiwanese to help them defend themselves, and is what is behind the significant American military transfers to Taiwan. The Taiwan Relations Act is deliberately ambiguous about whether the U.S. would come to aid Taiwan in the event of a Chinese attack. But as I say, President Biden seemed to change that. However, for the past day plus 2 or 3 hours, there's a new sheriff in town. President Trump has a very, very different view of Taiwan than President Biden, or indeed every United States leader since June of 1950. President Trump sees Taiwan as small and unimportant, particularly within the context of his America First ideology, and he questions the need to help defend it. He claims unfairly that Taiwan destroyed the American chip industry, and he claims relatively fairly that Taiwan might be unwilling to defend itself. And the obvious question here, if the Taiwanese are unwilling to defend themselves, why should the United States devote blood and treasure to helping the Taiwanese out? I would note that one of the senior people in the Pentagon under the new administration is a guy called Elbridge Colby, who has said that Taiwan needs to up its defense spending as a percentage of GDP from the present level of 2.5% to at least 5% and perhaps 10%. That is not going to happen. And what is going on in Taiwan now, which involves the efforts of the opposition Chinese Nationalist Party to crater the Taiwanese defense budget, is not going to help out at all. So if we could have the next slide, please. What happens next is obviously a really pressing question. A lot of the attention on Taiwan has been devoted to the prospect of a Chinese invasion. As I said earlier, Xi Jinping has told the People's Liberation Army to be ready to carry out an invasion by 2027. At Taiwan Strait Risk Report, we consider the invasion scenario unlikely. To begin with, the possibility of U.S. military pushback remains in the background. At the same time, the economic implications in terms of a possible sanctions regime and widespread destruction of Chinese infrastructure also argues against it. In addition to which, even in ideal situations, an amphibious invasion is very, very difficult to carry out. It's particularly difficult in the Taiwanese case. You are constrained by weather patterns to the time in which you could move to about 2 or 3 relatively short windows over the calendar year. At the same time, there is a significant dearth of landing spots on Taiwan, which would allow the Taiwanese to concentrate their forces. But most important of all, it's unnecessary to get what the Chinese want. That's because, if we could have the next slide, please. That's because China has been involved, at least since 2020, in a particular strategy which seeks to create incremental facts on the ground and aims to erode Taiwanese morale to the point where it basically capitulates on its own and moves to try to get the best possible deal that it can. So this gray zone short of war strategy begins in earnest in 2020 with a big increase of Chinese aerial incursions of China's self-declared air defense identification zone in the southwestern quadrant of the ADIZ. After the Pelosi visit to Taiwan in August of 2022, it morphs into an effort that effectively culminates in the elimination of the informal median line along the Taiwan Strait. And as Chinese exercises just last month showed, China now has the ability to surround Taiwan with air and sea assets, and at the same time to threaten area access denial against U.S. and possibly Japanese forces who might want to come to Taiwan's aid in the event of a Chinese attack. so that what the Chinese are doing with this gray zone strategy is to move very, very incrementally. It's really a case of the use of the Leninist dictum about sticking the bayonet in. As long as it encounters flesh, you keep pushing. When it encounters steel, you withdraw temporarily to live to fight another day. What we've seen under the Biden administration is a lot of flesh and inability or an unwillingness on the part of the U.S. to confront these short of war incremental gray zone tactics, which not only include activities in and around the Taiwan Strait, but also with respect to the Philippines and even north of Taiwan into the Ryukyu Island chain, Okinawa. One of the questions that we have to ask ourselves is, where are we going with all of this? We think, if we could have the next slide, please. We think that what we're looking at as this Leninist aphorism gets into play, we're looking at a big increase in violations of this self-declared Taiwanese Air Defense Identification Zone. The next step would be People's Liberation Army Air Force direct overflights of Taiwan, followed by Chinese demands that foreign air carriers file flight plans when they serve Taiwanese airports. The next step, and this is obviously key to our interest here today, is that the Chinese would move to inspect foreign vessels serving Taiwanese ports, either at sea or possibly on Hainan Island, which is Chinese island, southwest of Taiwan. And then finally, if there's no pushback to any of this, and as I've suggested, there is very little indication on the part of the new administration, particularly with the influence of people like Elon Musk. There is very little indication that the Trump administration is going to step up here. So if there's no pushback, we could see a gradual escalation until a selective quarantine, that is selective inspection of foreign vessels and aircraft serving Taiwanese ports and airports, to a full-scale blockade, until ultimately people in Taiwan feel that essentially, with the U.S. out of the game, Taiwan will surrender. If we could have the next slide, please. So what are the implications of all of this? Well, we're going to see clearly Lloyd's is going to go ballistic. We're going to see a huge increase in shipping insurance problems amid credible threats of disruption. We're going to see a potential threat to the high-end chip supply chain. As I'm sure you're aware, Taiwan, particularly TSMC, provides about 60% of the world's high-performing computer chips, and probably 90% of the most sophisticated of those chips. We're going to see a vast increase in Chinese ability to project naval power east of the first island chain toward Guam and Hawaii, potentially the west coast of the United States. We're going to see strong incentives for U.S. allies like Japan and South Korea to make their own deals with Beijing. I can tell you from conversations I've had here in Australia, Australia is very, very conscious of this revolutionary change that is in the works. They don't know what to do about it. We're going to see, as Stas has pointed out, we're going to see the end of the hard-won democratic freedoms that the Taiwanese people started achieving in the late 1970s through the 1980s and 1990s. We are going to see, I think, the end of the American century, as Henry Luce defined it. Just on a personal note, I would say that my entire career has been involved in in the American project in East Asia in one form or another. When I was much younger, I was a light weapons infantryman in Vietnam. I served in the U.S. Embassy in Thailand in the 1980s as part of this, and I've been following this situation extremely closely since I started out with this after my first visit to Taiwan in 1968. So there's a lot at stake here. I cannot overemphasize the degree of change that we are facing. I would argue that it's a change for the worse. Stas, I think, has summed up that argument very, very well. So the last slide, please. What we're going to be doing at Taiwan Strait Risk Report as we move forward is we're going to be monitoring the situation very, very closely through our monthly report and our periodic risk alerts. Of course, to any of you, we stand ready to help in any way we can to navigate this very, very complex and fast-changing situation. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks, and I guess we're going to have some discussion now, and I look forward to answering any questions that you might have, either on the panel discussion that we'll have, or if you want to get in touch with me, be happy to help you out in any way I can. Thank you very much for your attention.
Peter, thank you very, very much. This has been a really excellent overview. For the participants, the slides of Peter's presentation will be made available within the next 24 hours, and we will send out an email to everyone with a link so they can follow up on that. Now, I know that Admiral Dumont's time is very valuable and that he has to leave at noon. So, Admiral, could I maybe ask you to come in at this point and give us some of your comments and insights?
Yeah, thank you. And Peter, thank you for that remarkable overview. Stas, can we put up Peter's slide on implications, the next to the last slide, please?
Yes.
I think
Todd, can you do that?
Peter has it right here on the implications that if this ends up into a shooting conflict, I think that's critically important for us to think about as educators, as business leaders, professionals. Are we able to get the slide?
Todd, can you get the slide up, please?
The implication slide.
Yeah, give me a minute. I just had taken it off. Hang on.
Second from last.
Shoot.
Flip through those, go to the last one.
Okay, hang on.
That one.
That's it.
Thank you.
Great.
So I think all of this is quite accurate in the event of a shooting war, especially if there's a weak response from nations who have an interest in what's going on in that part of the world and in the supply chain disruptions that Peter talked about. I think it's also important for us to remember China hasn't really demonstrated much military might. They do a lot of saber rattling, but like Peter said, they don't have the ability to do an amphibious takeover of a country like Taiwan. It would be a hard slog for them, and it would not be an easy undertaking. And remember, China hasn't fought a war since its 4-week war with Vietnam during its brief invasion in 1979, I believe it was. And the Chinese are really aware of the implications, astronomical price tag that would come with any sort of invasion. Global GDP would drop significantly. Foreign investors, I think, would begin pull back from China, further reducing China's exposure. And I think the Chinese political leadership are aware of this. But what they have done is, as Peter did mention, and I fully agree with, they've adopted this view that the best way for them to achieve their aims without ending up in a shooting war with the US or other allies is to use coercion without violence. And we've seen them doing it for several years. Economic impact, and they're trying to tighten the screws on Taiwan. They are increasing the political pressure on Taiwan by putting pressure on other nations that have relations with the Taiwanese government. They're using cyber attacks against Taiwan and its neighbors. They're also using judicial tactics against Taiwan and people in China who was sympathetic to Taiwan. They're clearly using significant diplomatic means, informational, as well as the gray zone military tactics that Peter mentioned. I think we need to expect this to continue. My greater concern is if the Chinese miscalculate and cause an escalation or some sort of a conflict that they hadn't anticipated. The other thing they're trying to do is they are trying to reduce confidence of the Taiwanese people in themselves, in their economy, and in their leadership. And I think this will also continue. What a U.S. response would be would depend on how any conflict started and how much advance notice there was, what our military posture was at the time, and a host of political calculations that we can't even begin to get into here, just because the number is actually endless. But I think these implications are very real, and the threats to us and to the global economy are significant. And there would be huge impacts to global shipping and global energy supplies and the insurance industry also, as Peter mentioned. Stas, why don't I stop there and turn it over to my colleague, Chris Chiego, because I know Chris has views on this. He studied this, and this is right up his alley.
Thank you, Admiral.
All right, I'm going to try to use the microphone in this room. Can everyone hear me on this?
We can.
Great. So I want to add a little bit more onto this about the invasion possibility and why that may or may not be a thing. I agree, I think, with what Peter was saying, that there's a lot of disadvantages to an invasion. Invasion is very no turning back. You basically cross the Rubicon at that point when there's an actual full-scale invasion going on. It also creates a dilemma of what would China do in the first place? Would the PRC go after American bases as a preemptive strike to try to stop American responses or forestall those? So that creates all these dilemmas that a blockade might avoid. That said, there's also some advantages to the approach here with an invasion. An invasion could be a fait accompli. It may be hard to do. It will take, again, more development of ro-ro ships and other development of these things, but it seems like China's working to increase, again, its shipbuilding capacity. It has started doing some small exercises with civilian ships in the merchant marine on this. And that's another possibility. If they could just run across the strait quickly and get control of Taiwan before U.S. could respond, that might solve some issues there, but it's also very risky. I have been doing some research on invasions, these amphibious invasions, and they're not very common throughout history. They're hard to pull off. Most of the time, they don't actually come to fruition. But when people do attempt them, they tend to succeed. So we'll see if China's in that point in the next few years on those. The blockade part is interesting, too. I think blockades also have some disadvantages. As soon as you start, tightening the screws in some extent, you do alert the U.S. that there's something going on here, and that would give the U.S. a chance to respond, to work with its allies, to say, look, what's happening? Things are getting more intense than just these current sort of gray zone actions. But there's a whole spectrum on this in terms of what could happen. There could be mining of waters off of Taiwan. There could be more of these cyber attacks. There could be more inspections. There could be more accidental collisions and things like that. That's important for the maritime industry to understand that, what will your ship do if it's approached by a Chinese Coast Guard vessel and says, turn around? What do you do in those cases like that? So it's hard to figure out how that would work in some cases. A few other things, too. I think there's also a virtual blockade option that's even a bit less kinetic in some ways. There's this, I think Peter alluded to this a bit, information warfare. The cables off the coast of Taiwan that carry the internet into the area there are very vulnerable. We just saw one cut recently. It's pretty easy. Everyone knows where they are. If someone wanted to cut those when they come on the land and kind of cut Taiwan off from the world, you could be more jamming the communications, maybe some penalties and sanctions on ships and companies that do business with Taiwan. So doing those sort of things like that and just gradually exerting force, without kinetic action for a while. And I think there's going to be, other things about this gray zone stuff. At what point in the gray zone action do you see insurance rates skyrocket? Will people start to divert routes around Taiwan? What will South Korea do? What will the Philippines do? And other things like that. And the last thing I'm just going to mention a bit here to think about here is there's this interesting thing going on with both the U.S. and China kind of working on rearming their nuclear forces. Both of them are upgrading them. China especially is getting a lot more nuclear weapons. And in some ways, we call this in political science the stability-instability paradox. The more stability there is in terms of nuclear weapons, neither side wants to attack the other because they know they could destroy each other with second strike nuclear capabilities. Then that actually creates some incentives to say, well, we can saber rattle even more because surely no one would ever escalate. And that gets to, I think, Mike's point about the miscalculation. I think that's the big danger is if there isn't communication about this, if there is a line crossed at some point inadvertently, again, a ship collision, a cyber attack that goes too far, or some kind of sabotage operation that goes too much, there could be issues there too. And I think the last thing I just want to say is China is much closer to Taiwan than the US is. And that creates a huge strategic dilemma. It's about 100 miles from the coast of mainland China, Taiwan. The United States, we have Guam, we have Okinawa, then we have Hawaii. And would we be able to use other bases? How would those things work in the event of a conflict? And do we have enough ships to work on this right now? And I think China's merchant marine is like something like 9,000 ships at this point between China and Hong Kong. And the United States, as you all probably are aware of, is not anywhere near that. So I think that also limits the U.S. options and maybe makes a blockade more attractive to China, because if you're trying to get ships into Taiwan, that's a very different thing than just destroying things, right? Guarding a ship, getting it into the ports, and trying to offload this regularly to keep a whole country of 24 million alive. So that will be a challenge. And I think the maritime sector has a lot of roles to play with that. And I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing some more discussions of U.S. strategy incorporating the maritime aspect, and maybe the maritime industry working on those sorts of things too. So that's all I have to say, and I'll turn it over back to Stas.
Thank you, Christopher, very much. I'm going to open this to questions, but I have a question for Admiral Dumont first. And Christopher just touched on that, which is the issue of sea lift and military sea lift, which is under the direction of the U.S. Navy. Admiral, we clearly have a shortfall in ships compared to China. Do we have any plan to start looking at ways to expand and to support an enhanced military sea lift?
That's yes, there are discussions about that and research ongoing. It is a significant issue for the U.S. government and policymakers that they have been wrestling with for years. As you know, a lot of it has to do with just the budget and capabilities of our shipyards, capabilities of our merchant mariners to deliver on behalf of Military Sea Lift Command. At Cal Maritime, we're trying to turn out as many licensed mariners as we can, but it's a difficult proposition. All of the state maritime academies are hurting for students, and we need merchant mariners to ensure the Navy's Military Sea Lift Command fleet and the commercial carriers that we require to project power at the time and place of our choosing. So it is something that Congress is very focused on. Myself and the other state maritime academy presidents have been included in some of those conversations over the last year or so about some of the interests that are involved in trying to rebuild our capabilities with our shipyards and the requirements that Military Sea Lift Command has. So it's an ongoing thing. It's going to take a conscious decision by the American people, and especially the taxpayers, on what they're willing to afford. And then, of course, congressional appropriators willing to appropriate the funds to increase what needs to be increased.
Very good. Let me just make one quick point, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. As many of you know, late last year, a bipartisan supported SHIPS Act was introduced in Congress that included our own California Congressman John Garamendi and two Republicans and another Democrat. So that legislation has been introduced. It will be reintroduced in the coming Congress, and it calls for the deployment of a 250 ship fleet The first 3 years, potential ship owners can reflag foreign-built ships into the U.S. flagged fleet, but they also have to make orders to U.S. shipyards to start building a commensurate number of ships. And the idea is that you would reflag half the ships and then build the other half of the ships and bring us to an additional fleet of 250 ships. We at the Propeller Club of Northern California are in support of the SHIPS Act, and we are going to be doing some outreach. And on February 26th, Charles Papavizas, who is a partner with the Washington Admiralty firm of Winston and Strawn, is going to be speaking to us about the SHIPS Act. And I'm also going to be talking to other propeller clubs about doing outreach with them. And as Admiral Dumont referenced, also through our maritime academies. And hopefully, Joel Whitehead, we could have a conversation with you and get your direction and leadership on how we might be able to do an education campaign here.
Yeah, I will just tell you right now from our initial discussions with our leadership that overall we are very much in favor of the legislation and are looking forward to lending our name to that. There are some concerns from some of our members that are in the insurance side of things with some of the provisions in there, but I think overall we're very much in support of it, and we'd be happy to help you advertise to that in any way we can.
Joe, thank you very much for that. Now I'm going to open up for questions, and anybody from the can either go on the chat or put up your hand, and we will ask questions of Mr. Enav. Yes, Matthew LaFiandra. Can you mute? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Enav and Admiral Dumont. Admiral Dumont, nice to see another New Englander here. I imagine you've got a pair of bean boots somewhere in your closet. Mr. Enav, I've been following this for some time, and one of the things that I'm curious about is your view on whether there's a sunset, in a way, on China's ability to really project power and take Taiwan by force. Because China's naval ability is escalating, but China simultaneously is facing increased pressures domestically, both in their economic growth and then potentially if their economic growth does not keep up with public expectation, whatever domestic public support they might require to mount an aggressive expansionary campaign. So I was curious if you saw there being a limited window where China might be able to aggressively retake Taiwan versus resort exclusively to a campaign of influence.
Great question, Matt. I appreciate it. There's no question but that the Chinese economy is facing severe headwinds. Probably the main influence here is this moribund real estate sector, the inability of the leadership to increase domestic consumption so that all of GDP, the figures are probably manufactured anyway, comes off of investment in infrastructure, the multiple bridges to nowhere, et cetera. At the same time, there are questions about the loyalty of the PLA that Xi Jinping is facing. Relations between the party and the military have been tense ever since the 1930s. This last decade is no exception. That having been said, I think that what one has to look at in terms of trying to predict a sunset on the Chinese ability to carry off kinetically what they might want to carry off, let's look at the relative power and willingness on the part of the three players. The Chinese are absolutely single-minded about this. The United States, I've argued now, looks like it's pulling out of the game. At the same time, the Taiwanese themselves are aiding the forces within the new administration who want nothing to do with another, in their definition, another useless foreign military adventure. That the Taiwanese themselves are doing everything they can to buttress those arguments. The opposition party is it's a very complex thing, what they're doing now, but the bottom line is that they're probably going to succeed in decreasing military expenditures as a portion of GDP from 2.5% to 2%. That's going to give a huge boost to the people in the administration who don't want anything to do with U.S. forces. So I would say yes. If one looks at China in isolation, one could make the argument that a sunset may be coming. But when you look at them in relation to the other two players, I'm not sure that that's right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions?
We have a question.
Okay, we have a question in the room.
Go ahead.
Kevin, let me hold for Kevin and Amy. We have a question in the room. So,
Hi, my name is Luis Sanchez. It's great hearing from you guys. So I guess from what I'm taking away from this discussion we're having here is that one of the big concerns about Taiwan is that, well, about our military is that we don't have the shipbuilding capabilities to match the Chinese in building more naval ships. And this question is addressed for President Dumont and Peter. So I guess my question is that why haven't we considered reversing some of the base realignment and closure rounds that we had since the end of the Cold War to meet that capability? Because there's at least 5 naval shipyards on the West Coast that if it was significant investments, we could bring back online and meet their capabilities, as the Marines have been doing in the Pacific with some old World War II air bases that we use in the island hopping campaign with Japan.
Admiral, do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, I'll start. So it's a good question. The Base Realignment and Closure Commission that decided what bases would be closed over the 1990s and into the 2000s is very political. And it had to do with economic interests, but it also had to do with political interests and where the United States would sort of marshal its resources. And really, to open a base or reopen a base or a shipyard is a huge undertaking. It's truly a national decision, and there has to be political will to do that. The other issue is quite frankly, when it comes to shipyards and our industrial base, we've relied on technology a lot, and we've relied on a lot of outsourcing. In the past, when we had shipyards, the majority of those workers were U.S. government employees, and we were experts in the shipbuilding field. We've gotten away from that, and all that's been outsourced to private industry. And so it's very difficult to rebuild a entity such as a shipyard or open up bases if you don't have the personnel capacity to staff those. But at the end of the day, the real issue is it's a political decision about what the American population is willing to pay for and what they're not willing to pay for. In the past, they haven't been willing to pay for large numbers of bases or shipyards or any other facilities under government control with government employees.
Thank you, Admiral. And just real quickly, one of the challenges by the SHIPS Act is to actually encourage and finance new shipbuilding, potentially in partnership with our allies in Japan and Korea. But as you said, it is a challenge and it needs political will. And we will be discussing that at a later date. It's a very, very good question. Amy Skoll.
Hi, thank you. So I guess my question is for Peter, but whoever wants to answer it can. Peter, you kind of spoke a little bit about actors such as Japan and South Korea and the Philippines and Australia. And so I was just curious, so there's one possible scenario, and I think you kind of mentioned it, of like if Taiwan does get taken over by China, what does that mean for some of these other states? But as the United States, especially with the new administration, essentially kind of signals that there's going to be a lack of response or that you can't count on a response from the United States. I was just hoping you could speak a little bit to what we are maybe seeing Japan and South Korea and the Philippines do in response to maybe coordinate their efforts or to signal some sort of resistance to this strategy as well, even in the absence of U.S. support.
Peter?
Right. I know that we're up against it time-wise, so let me try to answer this question telegraphically. The first point I would make is that, and this relates to the previous question as well, while clearly the United States is up against it in terms of its distance from Taiwan and its shipbuilding capacity, there are things that the United States could do to put the Chinese on their back foot. The main Chinese vulnerability is in terms of their exposure to the interdiction of hydrocarbon supplies coming into China, most of which originate in the Gulf. There are a number of choke points that the American Blue Water Navy can deal with in a way that the Chinese Navy cannot. Now, with regard to the question about South Korea and Japan and the Philippines, et cetera, Australia, I don't believe that they have, there is any possibility that they could get together among themselves without clear-cut American leadership to face down the Chinese. History is full of examples of people who make decisions based on the way they see the power dynamic operating and trying to get the best deal possible, despite some sort of ideological or other proclivities that they might have. I think that we've seen this recently in the past couple of days with a lot of the tech sector in the United States, genuflecting to kiss the ring, which is something that, given the pronouncements of a lot of these people as recently as 6 or 8 months ago, one wouldn't have expected. So the capacity of the human species to accommodate itself to changing realities, geopolitical or otherwise, is endless. So I'm not hopeful that there would be a Japanese, South Korean, Philippines, Australian response without strong American leadership.
Thank you, Peter. So it's the United States and our new President Trump will need to show up if something.
Absolutely.
Kevin Claypool.
Thanks for the presentation, Peter. It was very interesting. What policies would you like to see the U.S. or any country implement to address this issue, aside from the SHIPS Act that we talked about? And then also, how far do you think the U.S. and our allies should be willing to go to ensure that Taiwan remains independent?
Personally, I think we should go very far, but I know that I'm speaking from a minority position, that's based on my own personal experience and my own belief that the United States security, the post-World War II American-led security architecture in the Western Pacific, while it's been guilty of some very wretched excesses, has basically been a force for good, led by the United States Navy, the ability of the United States Navy to protect and cultivate the expansion of world trade, which is in everybody's interest. So that's my personal view. I mentioned earlier this business of Chinese exposure, Chinese vulnerability to the American ability to interdict hydrocarbon exports. I think that is a road that the United States should consider taking. If we see a continuation and intensification of these gray zone activities, I believe to some extent that the Chinese are bluffing in terms of their military power. Admiral Dumont very compellingly mentioned that the last time the Chinese fought a war was in 1979, and they didn't come out smelling like roses. That in conjunction with the questions that Xi Jinping has about the loyalty and the efficiency of the PLA, Chinese potential economic vulnerabilities, all lead me to believe that there are things that the United States could do. First and foremost, thinking about interdicting hydrocarbon supplies.
Very good. Thank you. Christopher, are there any questions from our cadets? I see a hand being raised.
There's a hand, and I actually just want to say something very quick on the energy thing too. So there has been discussions about, the ability to interdict in the Strait of Malacca potential energy coming from the Middle East, especially. And I think China is definitely trying to build around that, though. They're starting to increase their reserves. They're probably working with Russia more. They're maybe exploring the Arctic more on this to try to find some way around that challenge. Another problem is Taiwan has, I believe Taiwan is eliminating their nuclear power as of this year. So that's going to be a little hard for Taiwan to also deal with in the case of a blockade at this point, being more dependent on these energy exports. So it'll be an interesting challenge to see who yields first, Taiwan or China, in the case of that. But let's go over here to our cadet on this.
Hello, I'm Liam Pope Hartwick. I'm an ISS major here on here on campus. And my question is, we talked a lot about what this gray zone strategy looked like from the perspective of China and what they would do. But what I'm wondering is, what does this strategy look on Taiwan's and what could they possibly do themselves to both either counter it or generally what it would look like from their perspective as this goes
down? I'll start out by taking that question. I think one of the considerations here is the poor civil military relations in Taiwan. I spent 10 years on Taiwan between 2005, 2014, 9 years, I guess. And I was struck by the lack of attention being paid to the China threat, B, to the prevalence of China accommodationist thinking in the Taiwanese army. Up until 2 days ago, the Deputy United States Secretary of State was a guy called Kurt Campbell. Kurt Campbell visited Taiwan for the first time, I guess 8 or 10 years ago, and he was asked what he thought about his visit, and I quote him directly here. I went to Taiwan thinking that I would see Israel, and I got Costa Rica instead. So what Campbell was really referring to was a lack of military resolve, a lack of awareness of the problem, and this low resilience. I would sum up my entire presentation by saying that what China has going for it most of all is the combination of a lack of American resolve to help out the Taiwanese and a lack of Taiwanese resolve to help out themselves. This is what China is counting on.
Thank you. Other questions? Anybody from the CMA audience?
Anyone else? One more?
Hi, it's me again, Luis. So this question is addressed for Peter. So here, your group specializes in the risk assessment for Taiwan, as you previously mentioned, and I wanted to ask if it's even considered. Does your group take into account for both the implications of what China might face if an invasion of Taiwan should occur, or both in the present and the future, of the vast amount of corruption within the PLA's high command and within the Chinese military-industrial complex?
Absolutely, we take that in consideration. It's a great point. That's why I point out that one of the things holding Xi Jinping back is his lack of faith in the PLA. It's lack of loyalty to his vision. Over the last 18 to 24 months, we've seen the purging of 2 senior officers in the Chinese rocket command. We just saw the suspension of someone on the Central Military Commission, which is this most senior party body responsible for military activities. We may now be on to the 3rd consecutive dismissal of a Chinese defense minister. We've had 2 of them. We're unclear about what's going on with Dong Jun, the incumbent. But absolutely, we take this into consideration. Absolutely.
Okay. Any more? I'm going to go one more question. Do we have any more questions? Going once, twice. Okay. This has been a very, very important presentation, and I want to thank the participation of California Maritime Academy, Admiral Demont and Christopher Chiego for helping facilitate this. And for those cadets who are there, I know that you guys have got classes, and but this is your future. We at the Propeller Club of Northern California, as I said, are going to be hosting a presentation on the SHIPS Act on February 26th, and we would very much appreciate any participation to discuss this and support this, and we appreciate Executive Vice President Whitehead's support and direction on that. So that will be happening on the 26th. On February 18th, the Propeller Club of Northern California has a Women in Maritime Transportation at Scott's Seafood. You are invited. You can contact me for information. Several cadets have been invited through Captain Bannister. Peter Enav, his information is available. We welcome any follow-up. We will provide the video of this presentation and his slides within 24 hours. Anybody who's interested in following up with Peter, please do so. We want this to be an ongoing research and education effort. This is a very important issue. We really do not comprehend how serious this could become for us. Just think if all of the high-end semiconductors that we used to get from Taiwan all of a sudden don't show up. Just take that one for consideration. And the second thing, think about what happens if the United States suddenly has no allies in the Pacific and is forced to start looking to defend Hawaii, Alaska, and Guam, and be in a very different situation than we have been during the American century. Peter's presentation is a warning of things that are not that far away, and we hope that the Trump administration will think about these things and take a more assertive role. I'm Stas Margaronis, President of the Propeller Club of Northern California. I want to thank all of you for your participation. Peter, really great job. Thank you very much. Again, Christopher.
Well, thank you all. Appreciated it. Enjoyed it.
Okay. Goodbye from all of us here.
Thanks, Stas.
And we appreciate it. See you soon.